Individual Whiteboards, a formative assessment project for M522 Assessment for Teachers by Krista Freitag. For this project, I decided to implement using individual whiteboards in my classroom. Why? Well, there are a couple of reasons. The first is that I had bought them, and I had them already in my classroom, but I hadn't really used them much. I had used them here or there, maybe 5 times a year within the course of the last 2 years that I had them, but I knew I wasn't using them as efficiently as I could as a formative assessment tool. As a result, I decided to implement them into this project to see ways that I could use them daily rather than a just here and there activity. As I said, I already had the resources. It wasn't something that I had to go out and buy. I already had the whiteboards and the markers in my classroom, so I knew that I could implement them fairly easily. It was an ability for me to do a quick check of where my students are. I do a lot of things called OYOs, which are on your owns, as I'm teaching, meaning I have the students write down an answer and I check around the classroom to see how they're doing. However, I knew that this would be a quick check because students could easily hold up their answers and I could see it from the front of the room instead of having to walk all over the classroom. This also allowed the students to take an active look at what they were doing and what their classmates were doing. It allowed them to see where they may be making mistakes and allowed them to see, okay, this is where I'm getting tripped up compared to other people. And I also thought it would give me a better understanding of where my students are, but not only that, but the students a better understanding. And it also would allow me to see who were being challenged, who was being challenged, and where those challenges were. Not only that, but it'll let the students see, okay, I'm really struggling at this component, or and this is where I need help. There were 3 articles that I looked at as research, and the first was Teaching with a Whiteboard Classroom. Some of the key components from this were engage your students every lesson. Every student is active participant of every single lesson because they have something to write on, which they're holding up every single time. It also allows the teacher to know exactly who is grasping it and who isn't because of those quick checks that you're able to have them hold up and look around the room. Mistakes can be easily wiped away. It isn't permanent. Students can easily go, oh, this is where I made my easy mistake, and erase it, rather than going, oh my gosh, I have to redo this entire paper because of this. They also can be used in multiple components. They can be used in group instruction, small group instruction, and individual instruction. And I used a variety of these in my experiment as well. And there's no technological problems. They're automatically there. You're not going to have mistakes because you can't get the PowerPoint working or you can't get the other technology working, which we all know never happens with technology. The second one that I looked at is called Formative Assessment, Redirecting the Plan. And some of the key components of this article talked about whiteboards being quick. They're easy, they're quick. It doesn't take a lot of prep work because all you have to do is pass them out. It allows the teacher to see the individual work rather than the group work, and you can focus in on each student and how they're doing. They're also inexpensive. And it also allows for deeper questioning because you're able to alter your questions based on the answers and the responses which you are getting from the whiteboards that the students are giving you. The third article that I looked at is called Using Whiteboards, Fun Ideas for Reading and Language Arts. And even though it was directed towards language and reading arts, there were so many ways which I saw that it could be applicable to math as well. Some of the ideas and which they presented in here are agree or disagree. You can just have the kids quickly write on the board. Discussion questions, meaning I could have students write down a question about the answer or the concept rather than just having them do straight up problems all the time. A review, and this is where I had used whiteboards really in the past, was I would really only use them for chapter reviews and that's it. Warm up activity, instead of having them write in their notebook, they could just write it easily down there. Games, voting, 1, 2, 3, 4, or so on and so forth, and then short response. And like I said, all of these could be applied to math, definitely, even though this article was for reading and language arts. There were a couple of challenges which I foresaw with implementing whiteboards in my classroom. The first of which was just resistance to doing something else for math. We have to do something else and something new. And then the second was speed. I definitely have some students that work faster than others, so I was wondering, what do I do while those students that understand it and answer really quickly are waiting for the students that just take a little bit longer to finish? And then also on the flip side, how much time do I give? Do I let them struggle for 5 minutes, or do I give them a minute whether they get it or not and then go on? The next challenge I saw was a lack of anonymity, meaning that the students couldn't make mistakes without their classmates knowing. And this was something that I was concerned about, that they would be worried if they didn't understand it because their whole class would know too. I predicted that the students might be able to make some easier connections. They might be able to see what their classmates are doing. They might be able to connect it with what they're doing compared to what's being done on the board, and that these connections would help them in the long run of their understanding. I also predicted a little bit of excitement. I have found that even though I teach high school, my kids love writing on the whiteboard. So I thought that they might enjoy having their own whiteboard to write on as well. I predicted that there'd be a little bit of extra interaction between the students and their classmates and me, because it was a source of conversation. The students were easily able to compare their problems with each other rather than always having to compare it with what's being done on the board. As I said, it's a conversation builder. They have somewhere to start, and they can also explain their rationale a lot better because they can easily work through the problem with a classmate rather than just listening to the teacher say and explain it every single time. I also predicted that it would help guide my questioning and teaching, meaning it would let me know if I needed to do a problem of the same concept, or if I was able to build on that concept and make it a little harder, or if I was able to move on to something else entirely. Not only that, but it could help me guide and alter my thought process of my questioning so that I could help the students understand where they're struggling. I wanted to do this experiment in both of my geometry classes because they're both very different makeups of kids. The first class I did it in was a class of 17, I have 14 freshmen and 3 sophomores, and they are very high achieving and self-motivating. They want to be challenged. They tend to like math. They tend to have been told that math is, they're good at math along the lines, and they really enjoy being there. The second class which I used it for was my regular geometry class, and this is comprised of 12 sophomores. I have 6 transfer students this year, so they have a lot of different ways that they've been taught math in the past, and at least 2/3 of this class are ADHD and ADD, so it is completely different in that it is constant movement. It's also in the afternoon, where the other class is in the morning. We do a lot more different types of conversations and moving around the room because they need that in order to stay focused, where the other class really does like small group to stay put. And this regular geometry class has also been told many times that they're not good at math, and that math doesn't come easy for them. And as a result, I've had a lot more resistance to math this year. I did this activity, or this experiment, Monday, November 9th through Friday, November 20th, and I used them every day except for Thursday, November 12th, due to taking a test. Students got the whiteboards daily. They came in my classroom, they grabbed a marker, a board, and a paper towel in which they were able to have. I used a variety of techniques with the whiteboards. The first was the on your own check that I talked about earlier, and I had the students do a problem and then they would hold up their boards and I would check it from the beginning of the front of the room. The next was an OYO check with a classmate. So instead of checking with me, they would check with a classmate and see if they were right or wrong. And then with this, I would do lots of compare and discuss. So show your board to a classmate, get up, move across the room, find somebody near you and compare your answers. And if you have a different answer, discuss why and discuss your rationale and how did you get there. And then the last way in which I used the whiteboards was a group mix-up, meaning I would give a group problem and there would be 3 or 4 people and they'd work together, and then I would tell somebody to stand up and rotate groups. And so they were constantly working with different people and bringing different thought processes along the way because they weren't just working with the same people all the time. I used a variety of ways to collect my data. And the first was just teacher observation, watching what my students doing, how it appears that they're responding to these, what their attitudes are, what am I getting from this, what are they getting from this. And then through that, I was keeping it like a journal and notes as to what I observed every day and things that were awe-inspiring or things that, I didn't work exactly like I thought they were. I also just had informal student conversations throughout the process, asking students what they did or did not like about using the whiteboards. I also used an informal student survey at the end where I had them rate 1 through 5, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, a couple different segments. And I also looked at the homework quizzes and saw, was there an increase in scores? Now, this I also know wasn't as heavily looking at because it's different subject matter than what we were doing before, but I thought it was also worth taking a view and seeing if it was anything different. So for the student survey, I had them rate each of the following statements. 5 is an I strongly agree and 1 is an I strongly disagree. And I had them rate them. I had 29 students take this, and I've given you the averages for each of these. Now I know that some students might have just gone through and circled 5s for all of them, but I thought there were enough answers to try and get rid of some of those outliers. So the first statement was, I like using whiteboards in the classroom, and that had a fairly high 4.57. Next was, I feel like Ms. Freitag has a better understanding of my learning when we use whiteboards. That was a 4.25. I feel like it's easier for me to get an understanding of what more I need to learn when we use whiteboards. That was also a 4.25. It's easier to compare and discuss with my classmates when we use the whiteboards, and that was a 4.64. And then I want to keep using the whiteboards in class regularly. That was a 4.64. I was kind of surprised about the low student rating for number 2 and 3, as those are such big components of the formative assessment. And the number 2 was, I feel like Ms. Freitag has a better understanding of my learning. And number 3 was, I have a better understanding of where I'm making mistakes. In regards to that, I feel that Ms. Freitag has a better understanding, I realized that students don't know my teacher thinking, nor do they necessarily need to know my teacher thinking all the time. They don't know where I was moving on to next, and they don't know what I was planning on asking. And so, in some ways it surprised me, but in some ways I guess it didn't. I guess I don't always do the best job explaining my teacher thinking when it comes to those things. Number 3, I get a better understanding of where my mistakes are. I was actually really surprised about this one. Because of the different comparisons that my students were able to make, I thought that they would have a better understanding of where they were and why they were making the mistake that they were making at what point. I also, as I said, I kind of predicted that they'd be excited. I didn't expect them to be this excited. If I didn't have the whiteboards and didn't pass them out right away at the beginning of class, I would have somebody asking, do we get to use the whiteboards today? And they just loved using them. There really weren't very many negative responses. I expected, there to be some resistance, and really the biggest negative response was this quote from this girl. For me, I didn't like them that much because I work slower, so I either didn't finish in time when we hold them up, or I see everyone else's board around me, so I already see the answer. And there are ways to work around that, I know, by either giving her more time or making sure and encouraging her not to look at her classmates that are around her. But I was just overall surprised that there were more people that were like, I hated using them. The other one was they can be a distraction, and this was from a student in my regular geometry class when he would have it, and instead of taking notes like he should in his notebook, or instead of working on something else, he would be doodling on the whiteboard. And the comparison, how much they enjoyed comparing with one another. They really liked going, hey, look at mine, hey, look at this answer, comparing here and there. And then I had a 7% homework quiz increase. Now, like I said, I didn't put that much weight in this, but 7% is significant enough when my students tend to usually do fairly well on their homework quizzes to begin with. And I just thought that this was worth noting. I stuck mostly to my original plan. I did a lot more open-ended things than I thought I would, meaning I would give harder problems and have them talk to each other rather than me. And then my mindset was really what changed a lot, is I started this whole experiment thinking, okay, this is a teacher tool. This is going to allow me to know what is going on. Where really by the end I was looking at it as a student tool. It really allowed the students to deepen their understanding because of the conversations that they were having in class, and a lot more rich conversations rather than me doing all explaining all the time. Just an overall reflection, whiteboards are a tool which allowed me to check on my students and their understanding at different points. Students were a lot more willing to make mistakes. They liked making mistakes because they knew they could easily just wash them away. They're not permanent. They're easy to use, and they can be used in so many different ways. I do a lot of different formative assessment in my classroom to begin with, and it was just kind of transferring it to the whiteboards, and I really, really liked it. Here were some of my students' responses. One student said, "The whiteboards make learning easier because it gives you a hands-on experience with geometry, and it's fun to use them." I liked using the whiteboards. They helped a lot when doing problems in groups. The only downside was that if we did a problem that would help on the homework, I had to take a picture of it or rewrite it in my notes. And in the grand scheme of things, I found this semi-minor because my students all have iPads, so it's very easy for them to take a picture of it. I liked using the whiteboards because they made me feel like it was okay to mess up. It was also easier to see what I did wrong. I'm not completely sure why, but it was. The only thing I didn't like was that I could smudge my work easily. Once again, a minor problem, and just the willingness to make the mistake and the willingness to work together. I thought that those were some good, just overall general summaries and statements for my students about using individual whiteboards. For future use, first of all, I highly recommend them to others. There's so many ways which they can be used, and there's so many ways which I haven't even delved into and would like to use them for. I plan to use them and continue using them, but not every day like I was. I like to use different kinds of formative assessment, so I probably will look at using them 2 to 3 times a week rather than every single day. As I said, there are other ways which I like to use them. I would like to use them more for students writing down those questions. I only did that once in these 2 weeks, and I really think that would be a cool tool to have students write down a question that they have about a concept, and then to have them get up and walk around the board and have their classmates answer those questions for them. Also, just to continue to use them to interact with math. The different ways that you can with games and, agree, disagree, what step here, a step there are just huge. They're a key component, and they can be a key component of formative assessment. They're very, very useful, as I've stated throughout this. They're effective. Students like them. I like them. It's definitely an easy way to check for understanding. It allows students to interact a lot more, and it provides an easy way for them to interact because they automatically have something to discuss, so there aren't as many side conversations. And then here are my works cited that I used for this paper.